Welcome to another episode of United for a Healthy Stoughton. My name is Stephanie Patton, and I'm the Prevention Coordinator for the town of Stoughton. And today we're going to talk about some of the findings from the Youth Health Survey. So it's pretty exciting that this is our first survey in full since 2019. Because of COVID and some other complications, we have not been able to administer the Youth Health Survey at the high school and the middle school in its entirety since that time. So I'm really excited to be able to share this data with all of you at home, and let's jump in and see what the slides tell us. Okay, so we're going to start out with a couple of things that I think are important when we're thinking about data, or that are important to me. So you're going to hear me talk about a couple of kind of concepts as we go through. So one, we're going to really think about how we can balance hope and concern. When we think about this data, most of our kids are making really good and healthy choices, and some are engaging in risky behavior. And so both of those things can exist at the same time. And so we're going to talk about some of the, really positive news, and there are some things that we need to be concerned about and that we need to be thinking about and working on. The other thing that's important to think about is that this is a point-in-time data survey. The questions required students to answer in multiple choice. So of course, this is quantitative data. It gives us a lot of insight, but not all the answers. So you might leave after hearing me talk about some of this information with more questions. I certainly have more questions. It's an awesome place to start, but it is what it is. It's not everything, but it's really fantastic to have. And then the last consideration really is that a lot of the things that we're talking about are complicated issues that are multifaceted, things like substance misuse and mental health. And so a lot of these issues, because they're complicated, require us to collaborate and think about complicated solutions. And so today we're really just going to focus on the data, not necessarily about kind of what happens next, but in future episodes, hopefully you will hear us talking with some of our collaborators about now what do we do with a lot of this information. So the background of this survey is this survey was administered at the middle school on February 8th, 2024. In this presentation, we're going to focus on the middle school, and then if you want to stay tuned, there will be an episode about the high school data. We gave this survey over SurveyMonkey, so the students received it online on their Chromebooks. We used SurveyMonkey instead of any of the Google servers, just so that students really felt secure that their answers were anonymous and confidential. That's our goal with these surveys. It is intended to collect population level data, not to be identifying any individual students. The survey itself is based on the national CDC, the Center for Disease Control's Youth Risk Behavior Survey, big national instrument. A lot of the questions from our Youth Health Survey come out of that. There have been other questions that we have added over the years, sometimes from other instruments, based on our local needs and what is useful for us to know. In the middle school sample, we had 690 valid surveys. That represents 82% of our student population, which is a great sample. Some students opted to not take the survey. They had that option in the classroom. Some parents opted their students out. They also had that option. Some kids weren't in school that day. And then, sometimes there are other reasons why young people are unable to complete the survey. We work with an external evaluator, Kendall Bennett from Trendline Solutions, and she also had pulled a few surveys out for kids being not truthful on the survey. We also administered the survey in several languages at the middle school, which was awesome. So for students where English is not their first language, they had the opportunity to take the survey in their native language. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is connectedness. And so on the next slide, you'll see that we ask a number of questions about to sort of assess if students feel connected at school. This is really positive data. Most students reported that they agreed or strongly agreed with all of the statements that you see on this slide, that they feel like their teachers care about them, they feel valued, they feel like they're a part of the school, the behavioral expectations are important to them. I think what's sort of interesting about this data is that while most students, more than 50%, are in that strongly agree category, it does, I think sometimes we look at those numbers and wonder or wish why they aren't higher. One of the reasons is there are a lot of students who kind of fall in the middle. So there's a category that's I don't know. And so on a 5-point scale where 5 is strongly agree and 1 is strongly disagree, a lot of kids pick that middle number. And so you don't see that column here, but if I shared it with you, it would be somewhere around like 25% of kids in a lot of these questions answered in that middle column. So it's sort of it's a neutral answer. It's not a disagree. It's not a strongly agree. It would be great as we move forward to get more kids, more on that strongly agree side. But I think this is a really positive finding around school connectedness, and it's a great baseline for us to start with sort of post-COVID. We also looked at extracurriculars, and I know we have so many students involved in extracurricular activities. 75% of middle school kids reported that they're involved in something outside of school. It could be a school-related extracurricular, like a club, a school sport. It could be something that's happening in the community. It could be being involved with their church or synagogue. Any sort of extracurricular activity gets picked up here. And we know this is actually a really powerful protective factor for kids. And so in our survey, we found that students who were involved in some sort of extracurricular activity were more likely to be physically active. That could be connected to the fact that a lot of these extracurriculars are sports related. And actually, we found there was a connection between increased sleep and participating in an extracurricular activity, which is kind of interesting. So 74% of the students who were involved in an extracurricular activity got 7 or more hours of sleep as compared to 63% of kids who were not involved. So maybe those kids are more tired from all the activities that they're involved with, but more sleep is a good thing. We'll talk in a few minutes about how much sleep on average our middle school kids are getting. And so those are positive numbers as well. So next we're going to talk a little bit about what substance misuse looks like at the middle school, alcohol and other drugs. The good news here is that most middle school kids are not involved or even experimenting with alcohol or other drugs. But there are some things for us to be paying attention to. And so in this slide, you can see what it looks like compared to 2019. And so here you can see that alcohol use among our middle school students is up a little bit. This is lifetime use, so that means have you ever in your life had a drink of alcohol? I think sometimes with middle school kids, some of the numbers we pick up, particularly with alcohol, include kids who might have had a little bit of alcohol for a religious occasion. They're not supposed to include those numbers. I don't know that every kid reads every word on the survey, so that's what we're looking at. But vaping, so electronic cigarettes, and marijuana use are both down at the middle school, which is really positive news. And those are pretty low numbers. If you look at the scale of this slide, we're talking about 4% of middle school students reporting that they have vaped in their lifetime. And so that's an encouraging trend. On the next slide, we looked at just 8th graders. And so sometimes when we look at the middle school data, because the 6th grade class, and this is good news, usually has use rates of about 0 or pretty close. And so, when we run averages around use at the middle school, it does impact what the data looks like. So I like to look at sort of a snapshot of what's happening in 8th grade as well, which is that year before their big transition to high school. And so here you can also see on this slide that, on the left-hand side, those 3 bars are the 2019 data. The middle set is 2021. So we did do a small survey in 2021. It was during the time when we were hybrid. And so we have some data from that year. It wasn't the full youth health survey. And then we have our 2024 data on the right. So you can see again with 8th graders, lifetime use of alcohol is up. So have you ever used in your life? And electronic cigarettes, the vaping products, and marijuana use rates are all kind of trending downward or staying stable if you look at those numbers. So this, again, is good news. There is something going on that's a little bit different with alcohol, and it's something that I think we need to explore more and talk about. We know that there was a lot of alcohol in people's homes, particularly during the pandemic. We know that from alcohol purchase rates. So, I think that can create more of an opportunity for access. I think a lot of young people were observing adults using alcohol in ways that maybe were for coping and other things. And so it's important for us, I think, to be paying attention to this number. And we have some good resources around talking to your kids about alcohol, which I will talk about at the end of the presentation. The last middle school slide related to substance use and misuse here is around misperceptions and actual use. And so here we compare students who said they actually used alcohol or marijuana in the last 30 days prior to the survey. And what we find is that, if you look at the marijuana number, actually, where the red bar shows actual use, you see that number is so close to zero, it doesn't even show up on this graph. And so this is have used in the last 30 days. So those numbers, as you saw, our lifetime use numbers were pretty low. So the 30-day use numbers make sense, or even lower than that. But what's interesting here is the gap between what is actually happening with student use and what students believe. And so you see that where 3% of students reported that in the 30 days before the survey they had experimented with alcohol. If we went into the middle school and said, hey, do you think most of your peers here drink alcohol? 36% of them would say that it's the norm. They think that most of their peers drink. Now, the good news is that most students, so if we think about the green part of that bar for a minute, the 64%, recognize that it is not the norm, that fewer than 50% of kids drink alcohol, so that's good. There's still a pretty good gap, though, between what's actually happening and what students believe, and those perceptions can actually impact student use. So typically students who believe that most of their peers are using are more likely to use themselves, and so it's important for us to talk to students about how low those use numbers really are and what might be contributing to their beliefs that most of their peers are using substances. So that's a little bit about alcohol, marijuana, and vaping at the middle school from what we know from our data. Of course, again, that probably creates a lot of questions for people and things that you might be wondering about. That is great, and that's what we want. Great opportunity to have conversations with your student, if you have a middle school student, to be talking about the misperceptions around use, to be talking about what some of the reasons why we collect this data and why it's really important for young people to be delaying their first use of any of these substances as long as possible. The health outcomes and all of the other social outcomes are really significant. And so I think you've probably heard me talk on other episodes, and will again, about some of the reasons why it's really important for young people not to use. But we're going to keep going with the data and look at some other things that might be interesting to folks at home that we pulled from our middle school data. So let's take a look at bullying and fighting behaviors. I know these are conversations that a lot of us have been having about what's been happening around bullying and fighting. And so the first slide we have looks actually at that bullying data about students reporting if they had been bullied on school property. So this is like about physical bullying, and then whether they'd been bullied online. Unfortunately, what it looks like right now is that for whatever reason, bullying behaviors seem to have increased, or at least students are reporting it that way at the middle school since 2019. Clearly, a lot has happened in our world since then, and also how we talk about some of these behaviors. I think the other caveat with middle school that's important, and I think you see this when you can sort of see on this slide the comparison with the high school data, where the bullying reports are much, much lower. Sometimes behaviors that are unkind but not bullying get reported by middle school students on this survey. And so bullying has a very specific definition in the law. And I know that at the middle school, there's a lot of work that's done to teach students about what bullying is and what it isn't. But there are a lot of behaviors that fall into the category of things that aren't really nice that students might do to other students, that I think sometimes students use the word bullying to describe those behaviors, or families use the word bullying. And so some of that behavior I think also gets picked up in the survey, which is why I think our numbers look higher at the middle school than at the high school. But these are also really interesting opportunities to be asking questions and to be wondering about how students interpret the questions and what some of these things mean. So the data just sort of, they are what they are, right? They're what students report to us, and it gives us the chance to try to learn a little bit more. The next slide is about fighting. Again, I know this is a conversation that we've been having a lot in the schools and in the community around fighting behaviors. It seems like since COVID, some of these behaviors have been on the increase, and the way students interact maybe is different because of some of the impact of what it meant to be away from their peers during some critical developmental periods, and sort of how they learn to relate to each other. So here, sort of similar to the bullying, we see that in the middle school, some of these fighting behaviors students are reporting have increased. So more students reporting that they've been in a physical fight in general. That could be anywhere, and whether that's in the community, in their homes, that the in a physical fight question doesn't ask where. The second statement there is about being in a physical fight on school property. Again, the way students interpret these questions is a little unclear. And so, if you were to look at sort of sheer numbers about what these percentages represent, I don't think that many students have been in significant physical fights on school property. The other information we have doesn't bear that out, but I think the ways that students interpret physical fighting and what that means to them and what it means to be involved in a fight might be something that would be worth exploring a little bit more. And then there's a question about being threatened or injured with a weapon. And that question, threatened doesn't mean somebody necessarily has a weapon. It might be somebody sort of suggesting. Sometimes the language that students use with each other can be just like how feelings and other emotions and things can be really big with middle school students. I think sometimes the words that they use can be big or ambiguous. And so I think sometimes it might sound like somebody is threatening somebody with a weapon, even if they don't actually have a weapon. But again, these are things that are interesting things to be having conversations about, and places where we really would want to learn more. So moving from here, we asked some questions about mental health, which is also something that's on people's minds. And so we asked a couple of things in this year's survey. We asked about if students, that green bar about self-harm is whether or not a student had done something to harm themselves, like cutting, burning, some of these behaviors that are not intended to be a suicidal kind of a behavior, but just self-injury. And that was in the past year. Have you engaged in one of those behaviors? We asked, there's a question about depression, and the way the question reads is, during the past 12 months, did you ever feel so sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more that you stopped doing some usual activities? And so here you can see that about 28% of students answered yes to that question. The other two bars, the pink bar is about feeling anxious, and the blue bar below it is about not being able to control worry. Those two questions were asked in the 30-day time frame. So in the last month, have you felt really anxious more than half of the days? And have you felt like you've been unable to control or stop worrying more than half of the days in the past month? And so you see those numbers there, just to kind of give a snapshot of how students are feeling, and what they are sort of struggling with internally. So important for us to be having conversations with these kids. The next slide is about suicide and depression. So that top bar is that depression bar that we were just talking about in the previous slide in the last year. And that's, here you sort of see it by grade, 6, 7, 8. And then this year, for the first time, we asked some questions about suicide and suicidality. These are questions that exist in the big national survey. There's been a lot of conversation nationally about really paying attention to students and recognizing signs and symptoms for suicide. And so I think it's really excellent that we are asking these questions so that we can intervene and we can think about what our baseline looks like, and also strategies that we can put in place in the community and in the schools to support students. And so here you can see the blue bars about students who said that they had thought about suicide. The purple bar, this is all in the last year, about that they had made a plan. And the green bar on the bottom is students who said they had made an attempt in the past year to end their life. And so, I think this is important data. This is serious data. I don't know that this really looks significantly different than other state or national trends. The state data trends lag behind us by a few years, so it's hard to compare. But it's important. I mean, and these are real numbers, and these are kids who are having feelings that it's really important that they also are connected with an adult and have somebody to talk to. And so that's why that first slide around connectedness is important, and why we want to keep growing that as well. So we have a couple last things that around other behaviors. So let's talk about screen time. So we looked at screen time. We've looked at this before. This actually hasn't changed significantly since 2019. I was personally a little bit surprised. So this is the number of hours our middle school students report that they're spending on screens during the school day and not for schoolwork. So this, in theory, doesn't include weekends, and also is not supposed to include time that they spend doing things for school. So this would include things like watching videos online, being on social media apps, video calls and chatting and some of those kinds of things. And so here you can see there are, a significant number of students who are spending like 4 or more hours online in a school day, but there are also lots of students who are spending less than that. And so that is, I think, important context for, what kids are doing with some of their time. The next slide is about physical activity, and most of our students, 62% at the middle school, reported that they were physically active in the last week, and that they spent 3 or more days doing something that made them sweat or breathe hard, which is great. That's good news. We didn't ask this in 2019, and so we don't have the comparison data for what that maybe looked like before. But again, it is a majority. Like with a lot of these things, do we have room to grow? Yes, but this is encouraging that a lot of our students are reporting physical activity. And then we also asked about sleep. The average number of hours of sleep kids are getting a night. It does appear kids are getting less sleep than in 2019 when we last asked this question. The recommended amount of sleep for even a high school student is 8 to 10 hours. So we here at the middle school, we have a good chunk of students who are getting that much. We also have a lot of students who are getting less. Sleep is so important. It's so connected to all of the other things we have already sort of talked about. And so this is another area where I think there's some opportunity to think about the importance of this. I know it's challenging with adolescents. Sleep is they keep different hours sometimes than we do as adults, but another important topic and an interesting piece of information that we found in the survey. So that's sort of some of the highlights of the data. There, of course, were lots and lots of questions, and so if people have other questions about that middle school data set and you're interested in learning more, you can definitely reach out to me through the OASIS website and or reach out to the middle school folks. Where this is really interesting stuff. We are all collaborating around ways to address some of these areas of concern. I do want to share a couple of things that the coalition has coming up that might be interesting for folks. So coming up in April, we are hosting our Health and Wellness Fair. It's April 24th, so at the end of the month. It's at Stoughton High School. It's for high school and middle school students as well as their parents and caregivers. It's so much fun. This is the second year we've done this. So much excitement, energy. We will have comfort dogs. We have so many community partners doing all sorts of interesting things, a lot of them connected to the data I just shared. So somebody coming and talking about sleep health and hygiene, lots of folks doing stuff around substance abuse prevention. We're doing some stuff with the fatal vision goggles. Number of mental health professionals coming and talking about a variety of things. We have an amazing speaker, Dr. Randy Schuster from Harvard Mass General Hospital, doing a keynote at both ends of the day. She's going to talk to our students and bring some of her grad students and do something really interactive. And then she will be there at 7 o'clock for parents to give a keynote on adolescent substance use and why we should be concerned about some of those behaviors and what we can do. She's amazing, so that will be really great. Food trucks, all sorts of fun stuff. So we highly encourage, send your high school and middle school student. Parents are invited for the whole day, and certainly we would love for you to come and hear Dr. Schuster speak at 7 o'clock and come early and snuggle with those comfort dogs and come visit Hidden in Plain Sight and do some of the activities that are at the health fair. So we hope we'll see you on the 24th. So that's a big community event that we have going on. Two other things that I want to highlight is we have a new podcast. So as I mentioned, the alcohol behaviors seem to be up, and the first season of our podcast really is about that, how to have conversations with your kid around underage drinking and why it's so important to be having those conversations and how most kids are not using. Lots of local guests, also some fun folks who are researchers from other parts of the country. And so this is pretty exciting and new this season. And so please find it on wherever you listen to your podcast. It's called Where's My Handbook? Stoughton Media Access is hosting that for us. It's been really, really fun. And so we hope you find that and enjoy it. Put it in your ears whenever you have a little downtime. And then the last thing that's new, we have lots of stuff going on, but I think that I wanted to highlight is we are hosting a grandparents raising grandchildren support group, really for anybody who's a kinship provider, so who's raising a young person in their family for whatever reason, however they came to you. We know that there are lots of challenges that can be associated with that. And so the Coalition in partnership with the Youth Commission are hosting this support group at the Stoughton Y every Tuesday starting next week, March 26th from 10 to 11. Drop in and show up when you can. If you have littles, there is childcare available. And if you have questions, you can reach out to Teresa Tapper at the Youth Commission. Her number is there on that slide. So I hope this was helpful and informative, and I hope for you, I love looking at the data. I hope it generated some other questions and some curiosity, and stay tuned for some of the other ways that we're all planning to collaborate as a community to address some of these issues. And have a great day.